How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Thought. In this video, I'm going to talk about the technical interview questions for software engineering positions. In the last video, we have talked about 7 types of software engineers, and in this video, we are going to deep a little bit more specific on what kind of tech questions they might be asked. Firstly, I've appended a URL, which is the question list I prepared for myself for interviews. In this list, most of the questions appear actually in my interviews. Therefore, this list is really helpful for those people who are going to have the tech interviews as a software engineer. Alright, let's get started. The first part is algorithm and data structure coding. This part is the most common part for nearly all kinds of software engineering positions. No matter you're a new grad, an experienced software engineer, or even tech lead, you will be asked to do this coding. My best suggestion for you is to just practice yourself. For example, for myself, I practice a lot of questions on lead code. I think if you really want to find a good job, right, you should have like at least 100 problems, I believe. Personally, I got like 50 or 60% for the medium question, and 20% for both easy and hard questions. Besides coding part, there were a lot of Q&A questions. These kind of questions are not like they will ask you to write code. Instead, they will just ask you a question orally, and you need to respond to your interviewers your answer. These questions can vary a lot and can really reflect your fundamentals to CS. Therefore, nearly all kinds of tech interviews, they will definitely ask some Q&A questions. The first type of question is C++ question. If you are going to be a C++ engineer, these Q&A questions will be definitely asked. However, you are doing other kinds of positions, these questions can also be asked. It is because C++ is actually a really fundamental programming language. It can reflect your basic understanding about the programming. Here is an example. One of my friends, he is actually not doing the C++ engineer. However, during an interview, the interviewer asked him a lot of questions regarding to C++. It is basically to test his understanding about the programming. Second part is computer architecture. Computer architecture is also very common during interview questions. The most important part, I believe, for the computer architecture is basically CPU, right? So CPU got 3 parts, the control unit, ALU or arithmetic logic unit, and also memory. And of course, you also need to know a lot about cache, since personally, I was asked a lot of questions about cache. On the other hand, you also need to understand the memory, not memory on CPU, but for example the DRAM and also the hard disk. On the other hand, you also need to have a very deep understanding for ISA, which represents instruction set architecture, which basically is talking about how the hardware and the software communicates with each other, and this is really the fundamental or basic part of the computers. The third type of question is Linux. This question is really common for those server engineers and also system engineers. Since in the last video we actually talked about for these engineers, most of the time they're actually dealing with Linux system. Therefore, they have to really familiar with those Linux commands. Personally, I got an interview about the Linux, and the first question the interviewer asked me is, please list down 5 commands starting with the letter S. And this is kind of weird question. It's like when you go to the interview, right? And the interviewer just asks you this kind of question. Sometimes it can make you nervous, since if you really cannot list down 5 things, then you basically just like gone for your interview. You're done. And this kind of question is not like coding, right? You cannot like think of it. If you know it, then you know it. If you don't know it, the interviewer cannot give you a hint. Therefore, my suggestion for those people who are going to have Linux questions is basically to understand more about the commands, since that is really important. Next type of question is machine learning. Machine learning, oh gosh. So these kind of questions are the most difficult in my opinion, since it's not like you can understand a question by spending 5 minutes on Wikipedia. Since machine learning is really complicated infrastructure, if you don't know its base, you can never understand its higher hierarchy parts. Therefore, you have to start from very beginning and step by step. For example, if someone asks you what's the advantages and disadvantages for sigmoid function, right? Even though you know what a sigmoid function is, you cannot say its pros and cons. For example, there is a training converge for a sigmoid function, and you also need to know what is the training converge or the learning rate converge. And you also need to learn a lot about the training process, etc. Right? Therefore, if you really want to do well in machine learning interviews, you have to build up your fundamentals and go up level by level. Next type of question: operating system. Operating system questions, I would say, is another type of most common questions besides coding. Nearly in all the interviews I had, they asked me some questions regarding the operating system. And basically the operating system is not that difficult as many people think. Since for most of the interviews, right, the only thing they test you is just basically the threat and the process. This is the core for operating system. On the other hand, you also need to know the intervals, the time, the clock, and also, for example, the bus. So I think operating system is actually cooperated very well with the computer architecture. Computer architecture is basically focusing on perspectives on hardware, while operating system is basically focusing on software. Therefore, hardware and software combined together become our beautiful laptop. Next is network. Network is quite common interview questions as well, and this type of questions also appear in most of my interviews as well. If you're applying for server engineers, trust me, you will be definitely asked this kind of questions. Personally, I didn't list down the interview questions for network since I once took a course about network and I think I learned very deep. Therefore, I didn't put too much time on it. Probably here I can give you a very common question that I was asked like 3 times in my interview, and that is, what's the difference between TCP and UDP? You have to understand TCP and UDP very, very deeply, since this, I would say, is one of the most important concepts in entire network. If you don't know this, your interview basically is gone. Trust me, it's gone. On the other hand, you also need to understand the enterprise network to distribute the IPv4, for example, to different clients, and also you need to understand how these packets communicate with each other. Meanwhile, you also need to understand the different layers for those packets. What I mentioned just now were just simple concepts. If you search those topics, you can actually find a lot of knowledge related to those concepts. Personally, I would strongly encourage you to learn more in these areas, since these topics are not only important for interviews, but they're also really important to your future career. The last type of question here is SQL. This type of question is really common for backend engineer and also data engineer or data scientists. The most common type of programming language for SQL is MySQL. I know for most of new grads, they do not have hands-on experience with MySQL. However, this is definitely fine for interviews, since the interviewer will just ask you to use your favorite programming language to achieve some tasks in those database. They won't force you to use MySQL language. But of course, if you know MySQL, that's definitely the best, alright? My suggestion for MySQL practice is basically also on lead code. So there is actually a part for database, and you can just practice MySQL there. Just in conclusion, for what I've mentioned just now, there are basically 2 types of questions. First is coding. The second type is Q&A. Other than these 2 types of questions, there are actually another type of question which is called the design question. Design question is basically to test your understanding or your broader idea about the total or entire infrastructure. For example, if you're interviewing a server engineer or backend engineer, they will probably ask you to design a particular website. For example, what are the components you need? Therefore, you need to draw those components on a whiteboard and also to connect each of them. On the other hand, you also need to put some creativity or your own ideas in your design. It cannot just be a very easy design, since the interviewer will actually give you some conditions. For example, there are 1 million users for a particular server, while the other server is just 10. Or for example, if someone is attacking your website, how can you define in that area? Therefore, you have to insert your personal understanding based on your knowledge to your design. And the design question has no right or wrong answer. It's not like coding or QA questions. As long as you can describe your ideas and to persuade your interviewers, then you're done. I know for most of new grads, they will not be asked these kind of questions, since these questions should usually be asked for those experienced engineers. However, for some companies I interviewed, they actually asked me these kind of questions. Therefore, for new grads, the interviewers won't expect a very good answer on this. They just want to test you on your general ideas and your basic knowledge. Then that's it. Therefore, just don't be panicked when they ask you something you don't know. For one of my particular interviews, they actually asked me a question I totally have no idea. I've even never heard about that word before. Therefore, I just asked them whether you can explain these words to me and what does this mean. Therefore, they just describe it in very detail and okay, now I get it. And I just say my general ideas on how to solve this problem. And they were quite happy for my answers. Here are some of my suggestions. First is, don't be panicked, just be chilled. As we know, engineers are quite chill. And second suggestion is, if you don't know a particular jargon or a particular question, just ask them. Ask the interviewers. If you don't know it and you just answer like bluntly, you'll be out. Third question is, dress well. Don't dress your jersey there, since that's definitely not good. And especially for those financial companies. Alright, I think this is the end for this video. If you have any other interesting topics in mind, please leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, I see you in the next video.